Good evening and welcome to Gibson's Bookstore Remote. I am Elizabeth, the events coordinator from Gibson's Bookstore, and we are joined this evening by New Hampshire author David Elliott. He is a friend of the store, and we are so pleased to have him here this evening for the launch of his new book, The Seventh Raven. The Seventh Raven is a retelling of a Grimm's fairy tale, one of the lesser popularity, one that Disney hasn't made it yet. Disney hasn't turned this into a movie yet, but you got there first. You have retold it in verse, and you're here to share it with us tonight. The Seventh Raven, David is local. He is signing. He is personalizing these books. So if you order from Gibson's Bookstore, he will scribble in it with his very own pen, and he will scribble your name in it for you. We will throw the link into the chat sidebar here for you. So the Seventh Raven, please tell me a little bit about it.
Well, what can I say? It is it's one of my favorite tales, and you know, I've known it for I've read it for years, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about fairy tales. I don't know, Elizabeth, are you coming back, or is it me now?
It's you right now, but I can come back. We can talk together?
Okay, well, I think I'll do my spiel because that's kind of what I prepared.
All right, spiel away.
Okay, thanks. Guys, thank you so much. Thank all of you for coming today. It means so much. I saw so many names there of all the people I love and that I haven't seen for such a long time. So I really can't tell you how much it means that you spent willing to give up a little time. And I want to thank Elizabeth, of course, and Gibson's. And I just want to say, you know, that independent bookstores are the literary life of our country. And we must do everything we can to support them. And that is not just a plea to say, buy my books, but buy all of your books at independent bookstores. And if you can get it through Gibson's tonight, that would be wonderful. You know, I just want to say hi and a big thank you to my great agent, Kelly Sonak, from the Andrea Bound Literary Agency out in California. And I would be so remiss if I didn't mention my equally great author at Houghton Mifflin, Kate O'Sullivan. So, you know, I just also want to say, so here's the book. And, you know, there is another person involved that very rarely gets credit, and that's the book designer. And Charisma Rodriguez, you know that I'm in love with you. You do such a fabulous job with all three of the books that we've done together, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And finally, I just want to say thanks to Rovina Cai, who did the art. I'm going to show you some of the art later. She's incredible and added so much to the book. So yeah, so let's talk about fairy tales. So, you know, I love fairy tales, and one of the reasons that I love them is because because the bad guys get it in the end. It's so satisfying, right? Like in Cinderella, the real Cinderella, the doves come down and they sit on the shoulders of the wicked stepsisters and they peck their eyes out. I love that. Or in The Goose Girl, another of my favorite fairy tales, where the witch in the end gets shoved into a barrel studded with nails and rolled down the hill. Yeah, that's what she gets. Like, be nicer. And when I'm talking about these tales, I really want to separate the real tales from the Disney versions. You know, I have nothing against the Disney versions. I watched them when I was young and loved them. But basically, they're entertainment. And again, I have nothing against entertainment. If you knew the number of hours I watched television during this last year, kill me now. But I think the fairy tales are something beyond that. I think the real versions, and by the way, tonight I'm going to be talking about the Grimm's tales, but you know, fairy tales and folk tales are found all around the world. I think there's something like over 500 versions of Cinderella. The oldest one is Chinese, and it comes from about the 9th century, I think, if I got that right. But tonight we're just going to be talking about the Grimm's tales. And to me, those are masterpieces. And, you know, that's a word, masterpiece, that we throw around a lot. oh, what a masterpiece. That's a masterpiece. That cheeseburger was a masterpiece. So now you know everything about me. Entertainment and cheeseburgers, I'm happy. But in fact, if we think more seriously about actually what a masterpiece is, I think a masterpiece is something that we can return to. It stands the test of time because we can return to them again and again and again. And each time we return to them, they give us something new. It's almost as if they're renewing themselves, and in so doing, renewing us. So each time we go back to that book or that beautiful piece of music or that painting or whatever it might be, it's as if in some ways, it's as if the first time we've read it. And I have to say that I think that fairy tales fall into that category because unlike the Disney versions, the bowdlerized or the whitewashed versions that are about the external world, fairy tales are really about our internal world. They're symbolic representations of what can happen inside us. And they in a way, they show us a way to live. And when I say that, I'm not talking about being good. If it's one thing, then they're not teaching us morals at the end. I mean, if it's one thing we don't need, it's more school marms. And I say that as a dedicated school marm myself. Give me a ruler and I'm happy. So let me give you an example of what I mean by this idea of that these fairy tales are symbolic representations. They're showing us how to lead a fuller life. So we're all familiar with this trope of the fairy tale of the king who is ailing, and he wants to pass along his kingdom to one of his sons. And there are usually 3 sons. And the youngest son is sometimes referred to as the simpleton or the dumbling. Right? You know this story. You know these kinds of stories. And so he gives the sons a task. Maybe it's get a golden apple or something like that. And the first 2 sons go out, and whoever accomplishes the task inherits the kingdom. So the first 2 sons go out, the 3rd son goes out too, but they're kind of, what are you doing? You're a dope. The 3rd son is kind of like, da, 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 da. He's that guy. Well, they meet a crone on the road often. And the crone says, ask for some bread and water. But the first 2 sons basically give her the finger, right? They say, we've got stuff to do. We're important. We have a task. And they leave her there. But the 3rd son stops and he shares his bread and water with her. And guess what? Out comes the magic purse. There's the golden apple. He inherits the kingdom. It's so satisfying, right? I think the easiest thing for us to do is say, oh, that's a story about generosity. But do we need to be told that generosity is good? I mean, maybe after the last 4 years we do. Sorry. But in general, I think that's a very uninteresting lesson, if that's what we have to take from it. I don't think that story is about generosity. I think that story is about being responsive. The simpleton or the dumbling did not inherit the kingdom because he was generous. He inherited it because he was responsive to what was on the road in front of him. He put his ego aside and he was open to life. This is what I mean by fairy tales are showing us a way to live authentically. And by the way, I think that those phrases, inheriting the kingdom or living happily ever after, I think that's just code word. Those are code words for living fully, living your life. We often tell our young people and to ourselves, you can be anything you want to be. And I kind of cringe when I hear that because I think, really? Is that true? I mean, could I have been a professional quarterback if I wanted to. Those of you who know me, stop laughing. It's mean. I know what you're doing right now. I couldn't have been. So, and you know, I think we have to give our young people credit. They're much smarter than we think they are. They know BS when they hear it. I think there's something else we can say to them and to ourselves, which is this: you can become who you are. You can become who you really are. And you know what? I bet if we were together right now, the room would get kind of silent. Because to me, that's such a powerful and loving thing to say. And it's also true. And the other thing about that, you can be anything you want to be. It's kind of dead. Oh, you want to be a quarterback? Now you're a quarterback. It's over. But becoming who you are is a lifelong process. And we can live that process. We can go on that journey until the very end. And I hope all of us are on it now. I hope we're all still becoming who we are. And I think fairy tales can help us understand that better. But you know, every fairy tale heroine or hero knows that to inherit the kingdom, you have to enter the dark woods alone. There may be helpers there, but basically it's an individual journey, and we may have to sacrifice things. And that's kind of scary, right? Maybe it's why we don't do it. Well, you know how I feel about fairy tales now. So, you know, if you feel like pushing the crackpot button, go right ahead, get in line. But even if you don't agree with me, I think you will understand how I felt when I was teaching an undergraduate college class, when a young man in the back of the room, Kevin, I will never forget him, raised his hand. I had mentioned Rapunzel in the class. I forget in what context. And a young man in the back of the room raised his hand and said, "What's the Rapunzel?" He wasn't being facetious. He had never heard of it. Well, this was very disturbing to me and saddening. And I thought, well, if such tales as Rapunzel, such well-established tales as Rapunzel are leaving our consciousness, what about lesser known tales like The Seven Ravens? And it was at that point, I think the seed was planted, even though I was not writing novels in verse at that time. That was some years ago. But I think the seed was planted at that time. So thank you, Kevin. I hope you know who Rapunzel is by now. Well, I'm just going to very briefly tell you the actual tale of the Seven Ravens so that we have some common understanding. So a woodcutter and his wife, go figure, right? They have 7 boys. They want a daughter. So they have a daughter, but when the daughter is born, she is very, very sickly. She's not thriving. And in fact, she's dying. So the father sends the sons to the well to get water for her last rites. But because they're boys, they're very rowdy, these boys, and they each want to be first, and they lose the pail. The father gets angry, and he says, you know, "Oh, I wish you were ravens." Well, that's what happens. But the interesting thing is, the instant those 7 boys become ravens, the girl thrives. The girl begins to breathe and live. So the story moves ahead when the girl now is a young woman, and she hears gossips saying, "Oh, if it isn't for her, her parents would have their sons back." And so she determines then that she is going to go out on her own and find these ravens, transform them back into boys, and reunite her family. So off she goes. She decides she'll go to the sun because the sun will know where the boys are, but the sun is too hot. So she goes to the moon, but the moon is too cold and devouring. So finally, the morning star, Venus, I love that. Venus, the morning star says to her, I know where your brothers are. They're ravens still, but each night they must go to the glass mountain, and they're locked inside the glass mountain until the morning. And here's the key. All you need do is go to the glass mountain, open the door with this key, and you will reunite your family. But here's the weird thing. The key was a chicken bone. Weird, right? Well, she finds her way to the door to the glass mountain, but alas, she's lost the key. And now it gets real. Now she knows what she has to do. She cuts off her finger and uses it as the key. She opens the door. The boys, the ravens, are transformed back into boys, and the family is united. Well, I've loved that story for so many reasons. First of all, I love what it seems to be saying about too much male energy. We know what happens when there's too much male energy. We're living in that world right now, right? But it's also talking about when there's too much male energy in the psyche and the personality. I love what it's saying about sacrifice. Serious. And I also love that it's a story about wholeness. That's what we're all striving for, right? Wholeness. She's trying to become whole. She's trying to get her family or even her internal family whole. So that's the story of the 7 ravens. But you know, the story's kind of short. And if I was going to retell it, I had to, it's only about a page and a half. And so, you know, writers write to answer questions. So for example, in this book, Bull, it's the story of Theseus and the Minotaur. And, you know, the myth tells us how the bull is born, but it does not. And then the next thing we know, it's in the labyrinth. So, you know, I asked myself, well, didn't that child with the body of a human and the head of a bull have a, didn't that child have a childhood and adolescence? And what must that have been like? And how do we make monsters? And so in order to answer those questions for myself, I had to write the book. In this book, Voices, The Final Hours of Joan of Arc, which, by the way, just came out in paperback, not to be too unsubtle. But, you know, I became very interested in who Joan of Arc was. Not the saint, not the proto-feminist, not the military hero, but just the 16-year-old girl. So I had to write the book to find out. But in the end, by the way, I ended up with more questions than I started with. And then in this book, The Seventh Raven, I asked myself, those boys are ravens, but what would it be like if one of the boys was unhappy in his body as a boy? And what if he loved being a raven? And what would it be like for the sister who thought she was doing something great by turning him back into a boy? And so that was what I was trying to answer in this book. If you read the book, you'll have to ask if I was successful or not. So it is a novel in verse. There are a lot of characters and a lot of different poetic forms. You know, I had a really hard time figuring out what I was going to read tonight, so I'm going to read a little bit now because there's a lot going on there. So what I'm going to do is just read a little bit from the beginning. The book is in 4 books within the book: Change, Discovery, Journey, and Change. So I'm going to read a little bit from the very beginning, and then I'm going to go to the third section and read some of the contiguous poems there. I think that's maybe all you need to know. Oh, so there is a storyteller voice. So tonight you're going to hear from Robin. That's the boy who would be happy in his raven life. His sister, as she's older, her name is April. And then you'll also hear from a crone who was my version of the morning star. There's also a narrative voice that runs through the book. It's a little based on the house that Jack built. And so you'll hear that right away. So I think that's it. Oh, one other thing, if you happen to read the book, it would make me so happy if you read it aloud. In many ways, all these books were written aloud, and they're really meant to be heard, in my humble opinion. Okay, I'm going to take a little drink. See my mug? Dan and Linda, thank you. And let's get going. Starting about 3 or 4 poems in. And this is the cottage that's built near the river. Its timbers are aching. Its floorboards are cracking and creaking. They're quaking from so many boots, stomping in, stamping out. 8 pairs of boots, stomping in, stamping out. So many boots, stomping in, stamping out. Day after day after day after day. And the hearth burns too hot. And the thatch whispers, stop. And the footsteps are heavy, and the joists beg for mercy, but the heels have no pity. And the boots, they keep coming, 8 pairs of boots, stomping in, stamping out, day after day after day after day. And here are the boys who live in the cottage. The eldest is Jack. And the next one is Jack. And the third one's called Jack. And the fourth's known as Jack. And the fifth says he's Jack. And they call the sixth Jack. But the seventh's not Jack. The seventh is Robin. And this is his story. Robin. They called me Robin. How did they know from the very start that the murmuring beat of my infant heart would not conform to the rhythms of my brothers? One no different from the other, and insensible to the smart sting of thorns on the rocky ground. Each of us, it seems, has his part to play. Theirs is earthbound, like our fathers, their feet planted in the dirt. But I love the sky, its incandescence, its infinity, its colors. And they called me Robin. The naming of children is a fine and subtle art. Parents must consider everything the name imparts. Was it merely accident or the instinct of a mother? That mind hints at altitude and air, flight and feather. Whether luck or fate, fortune's sly, unyielding counterpart. They called me Robin. Well, I'm going to skip ahead now. The fathers changed the boys into ravens. This is Robin again, but this is in the first few moments of his transformation. There's just a little narrator poem before that. The arms of the balance eternally shifting. For some, they are falling. For others, they're lifting. Robin. Earth far below, the wind sighing. Are these wings? Can I be flying? What is this dream? I dare not guess. I think it might be happiness. So I'm going to move on, but I do want to show you Rovina's art. It is so fabulous. I hope you can see that. You'll see that page is black. That's when the brothers, who are very unhappy, whenever you see that black page, those are the brothers. Rovina, you're the best. Well, now I'm going to skip ahead to the very third section, Journey, April has discovered about her brothers, and she is now on her own. She's now on her own looking for her brothers, her first time out in the world. And the road, and so this is the narrator, and the road is a villain, and the road is a friend, and the road is a story, no beginning, no end, and the road is a question, and the road is an answer, and the road will transform you, a sly necromancer. And the road is a melody, and the road is a howl, and the road is a paradox, a grin and a scowl. And the road will not tell where it's been, where it leads, and the road is alive. It sings and it bleeds. Who takes to the road can never return, for the road is a fire. All pilgrims will burn. April. Is it days or months or years or weeks that I have traveled this coarse and rugged thoroughfare? Crossing cloud-topped mountains, chancing swollen creeks, I've learned that time can be immeasurable as air. There are moments I forget what I'm searching for, and the only point is walking, walking, nothing more. I tell myself momentum is its own reward, and that it's unimportant what I'm moving toward. But I know that's only weariness that's speaking, idle thoughts to guard against the pitfall of despair when discouragement and solitude see more than I can bear. I know exactly what I'm seeking. My 7 brothers, transformed, cast out, and lost. And I will find them. But I wonder at what cost. Her journey continues. She walks ever on. Dusk after dusk, dawn after dawn, she sleeps in the hay mounds. She eats what she finds. The road is a serpent. It twists and unwinds. She meets fellow travelers, the migrating throng. Each one is a question, a riddle, a song. The scofflaw, the sheriff, the pimp and the whore, the lover, the hater, the tinker and more, the wounded crusader, the healthy, the lame. Where are my brothers? Each answers the same. Your brothers have vanished. They live in the trees, gone in the dream space, like all memories. Hear the brothers. Our beaks pierce the clouds. Our talons are skewers. We scream in our sorrow. Each day is a misery. Each night is a torment. Cruel memory haunts us. Our heartbeats and marrow are phantoms that taunt us. Each tongue a defector betraying the songs we once harmonized. Familiars of witches, we sully the skies. Robin. My brother's pain is sharper, hotter, greater than my own. Back then, when I was still a boy, every muscle, every vein, every heavy bone felt wrong. Every tree, every stone, every table, every chair, even the air I breathed whispered, you don't belong. My brothers yearn to be the way they were before. What I have come to love, they disparage and deplore. They miss their glory days and cry out for what they've lost. But the sympathetic sun or winter's tender frost on my unclothed and feathered back bring in turn a comfort and a thrill. I love my shining blackness, my feathered legs, my bill, and especially my wings, like strong and steady oars dipping in the ocean of the wide and boundless sky. When I fly above the earth from my vantage in the consecrated blue, it helps me understand that everything depends upon a changing point of view. The house that seems so large below appears so small above. Could this be true, I ask myself, with all we hate and love? and the fields dream of rain in their untroubled beds, and the boulders awake, the grass lifts its head, and the bashful trees blush, and the streams and the hills and the moss and the brush, each sing a hymn to each root and each trunk, and each leaf and each limb, and the vines and the saplings take in the bright air, and the pond shouts its name, and the mud drops its shame, and the nettles rejoice, and the pebble that's never been known finds a voice. You know, I think I'll stop there. You're getting the idea. I was going to read a little bit more, but you know, you're probably sick of hearing my voice. I know I am. So that's the Seven Ravens. That is how it, those are some selections from it. And I'm very, very happy. Thank you for, thanks for listening, guys. And I'm very happy to answer any questions. Please don't make me feel like a jerk.
You're not a jerk, David. We love you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm looking at all these lovely comments coming in. Someone just said, I could listen to you read all day. And Dr. Earl James says, you should consider doing an audiobook. So I'd say that those are a ringing endorsement of your reading ability. There
is an audiobook, by the way. I haven't heard it yet. Houghton Mifflin is making its own audiobooks these days, and I am really looking forward to hearing what that is.
So now this is the point in the event where we ask audience questions. So if any of our audience members have questions that they would like us to ask, please do throw them into the chat sidebar or the Q&A box. We do have a couple to start off with. Deborah asks, your creativity stems from what? David, what is the font of your creativity?
Oh, God. I don't know. I wish it were deeper. That's all, you know, that's all I can say. I mean, that is such a hard question. I can tell you, I can be a little bit more specific about these novels in verse. And, you know, I am married to the most fabulous woman. Those of you who know her know that's true. And, you know, when we were married, somebody whispered in my ear, that is the smartest thing you've ever done. And I'm so afraid that somebody whispered in her ear, that's the dumbest thing you've ever done. But she, many years ago, before we were married, gave me a book of a translation by Richard Wilbur of Moliere. And I don't know if you know those plays. And, you know, I sound so highfalutin, guys. I'm the lowest falutin person there is. But I do love good writing. And Moliere, Richard Wilbur's translation of those plays, which are all in verse, I was amazed by them. I loved them. And I think the seed for these novels in verse were planted there. You know, I grew up in a Baptist tradition, and it only took me thousands of hours on the couch and thousands of dollars to get over it. But one thing that it did give me was, you know, I don't really consider myself a poet, but I think I have a good ear. And I think I got that good ear by singing those hymns in church, and I still love those hymns. So, you know, I think it's a mystery where creativity comes from. I think we all have it. But for those books, at least, that was some of what's informing them.
All right. So Leah has a question that I wanted to ask you. Robin is the youngest brother who doesn't quite fit in as a man, but delights in being a raven. Where did he come from? And is he in the original story at all? And I want to know why you named a man who turns into a raven Robin. Why did you name a man bird after a different bird?
Yeah. First of all, Leah, you know, I love you. And Leah has a new book coming out. If that's Leah Hannah, she's going to have a book out this fall. I'm so proud of her. It's called The Barn, so everybody should look for it. It's a picture book. It's beautiful. No, Robin is not in the original story. And in fact, one of the things about fairy tales, one of the reasons in fairy tales, they're named things like Cinderella or that is because they, we don't want them to be too specific. Because again, they should be speaking to all of us. But I knew that I had to name I knew I had to name the people. And, I hadn't thought about that Robin Raven stuff, but what I wanted to get at was the idea that sometimes people know things they don't know they know. We're all like that. That's what writing is, really, to find out what we don't know. And in that case, I thought, well, the mother, even when she named him, all the other boys were Jack, but there was something about him that she named him Robin, which is a bird. And so she knew something that she didn't know she knew. So that's how he got that name.
Well, let's flip this. And why did you name all the other brothers Jack?
Well, because I did not want to focus on them. And I love the way it sounded, and it was a little bit crazy, and I like being a little bit crazy. And I wanted to say, they're all the same. They're all those are the guys who are going to be devoted to not becoming themselves. That sounds so nasty. I'm sorry. It's not I become myself. Let's hope that never happens. But I just wanted to say these are people who they're very content, or so they think, living in that space that's defined for them already.
Tobin wants to know, what's up with the glass mountain? Why a glass mountain? Why in the original was that where the Braven brothers were locked? It's such a strange and striking image.
The glass mountains appear in many fairy tales. And I don't have a specific answer for that, but I would say this. I think a lot of us are locked in these brittle psychic structures that are both fragile and shiny and possibly a little bit dangerous, because when they break, there are shards there. And I think, the making of glass is an ancient technique. So one fun thing to do with any of these fairy tales is to take these symbols and make your own associations with them. And those are some of the associations I make. And also, I think it's hopeful a little bit that they're transparent. Glass is transparent. So, I think, what's that say? I'm just thinking of this now, but to me it says, when you're locked in. You can see it, but you might not be able to get out.
All right, let's see here. We've got Thomas says, David, you always inspire me. Thank you. It is interesting to reflect on the idea of the journey, the adventure, while we are in quarantine. I don't know when you wrote this, but did the lack of travel in COVID land influence this narrative?
A writer's life, like it's different from everybody else, but it is a little bit different in that, my COVID life isn't so different from my non-COVID life, because writers work alone, and so and even though I'm, I don't quite know how to say this, but even though I'm very extroverted in some ways, in other ways, I can spend many, many hours by myself. And of course, that's what COVID for some people has been about. But one great thing about COVID, this is not related, but my wife was here with me for the last year, and she's just getting ready to go back to work. And I'm thinking, oh my God, now I'm afraid to be alone by myself. I don't know what I'm going to do. It wasn't really, it did not really affect me that much, that much. The way it affected me is I ate like a pig. I'm so mad at myself.
I saw someone post on Twitter the other day. They're just like, I love how a year ago we were told you will have to spend some time alone with yourself and your thoughts for a few weeks. And we said, absolutely not. I will learn to bake bread. And we ate the bread. And it's just, you can't just leave people alone and expect them not to empty the pantry.
Yeah, that's right.
So Brian says, in reference to reading this beautiful story in verse, which of course should be read out loud, he's very interested in all forms of writing that are meant to be declaimed out loud: speeches, manifestos, declarations, prayers, slam poetry, tales, sermons, psalms, lectures, sermons. Again, I'm guessing you have thought more about this than Brian has about reading aloud, David. Might you say something about the importance of the story aloud for you personally?
Well, first of all, Brian Baldry, you are the smartest person and the most fun person ever. So whatever I know, he's going to know so much more than me. I can only tell you that, when I, well, if Brian says, where's my paycheck then? It's in the mail, Brian. I can only tell you that when I'm writing, I'm also reading aloud. So everything that I'm working on, I'm always stopping, reading it aloud, because I want to hear how it sounds. I want to hear the rhythm. I want to hear the vowels and consonants are working together. I want to hear the way possibly it could be paced or that kind of thing. And so when I say it was written aloud, I mean that. I studied classical voice. I wanted to be a classical singer. So I'm very interested in the human voice and the way things sound. So I don't know if that is a right answer or not, but if it didn't sound right to me, it wasn't right. And I spent a lot of time messing around with it, trying to get that.
Well, it worked.
Thanks. I hope so.
Rebecca says, when and how do you discover the structure of a story that you want to tell? Does the structure, for example, a novel in verse or a particular point of view, ever come first, or does the story catch you and then you find the structure to match?
Rebecca, that is such a fabulous question. I am so interested in structure. And I have to say, this book was very hard to find the proper structure. And if I'm very honest, I'm still not sure that I did. I did the best I could with what I had. But, for those of you who don't write, you may not realize it, but that every book has an architecture. It has a structure. It may be very simple. It starts from the beginning and it goes to the end in one line. That's one structure. It might start at the end of the story and go from there back to the beginning. There might be parallel narratives. So for me, and so when you're reading, it's always interesting to kind of look at the structure and see how that's built, because the thing I know about that is that the structure should be telling the story too. Not just the vocabulary, but the structure is also telling you how to read the book. I never know the structure when I'm starting out. I have to discover it. I wish I were clever enough to be able to say, okay, here's the structure. Now I know. But I feel like I can't write the book until, like this book, Joan of Arc, the voices, the final hours of Joan of Arc, a Kirkus Review best book of, well, I won't go into all that, but so obnoxious. But I will say that took me so long. I mean, I was messing around trying to find the structure with that forever until my editor called me and said, you have to hurry up. We got to move the pub date because another book is coming out and you have to get it. And that's kind of said okay. And that kind of was maybe the pressure I needed. I
Um,
love talking about structure, Rebecca. Thank you for that.
I read the end notes in the back of the Seventh Raven, and you mentioned that for each character you had a different poem style. How did
Yeah.
that feed into your structure?
Well, that's really interesting. At first, even though I'm not a poet, I love formal poetry. By that, I mean, I love poetry that has a form, that has um, a pattern that you follow, because I feel like that's the only way I can do it. So I need to know that. And then I have a little box that I can fit in there. But what's really so fascinating about that is that it's another question of structure. Like the structure of the poem itself informs and makes the character. I'm so fascinated by that. So, for example, in Robin, originally, I wanted Robin to speak in sonnets, but he ended up sounding kind of insufferable. So and it was because of that form, as much as I love, the sonnets, or maybe I should have been a better sonnet writer. And so then I changed it, and he now speaks in the beginning. He speaks in a form called the Rondo. And you'll notice when you heard him in the beginning, that first poem, and they called me Robin, it repeats 3 times. I wasn't just being lazy, that's the form. The line has to repeat at those lines. And so what it does is give kind of a constricted form, which worked really well because he himself felt constricted in that boy's body. So that's what I mean by, that's such a good example of the structure telling the story. And then later, when you heard the very short poem, when he became a raven, that was sort of free form, but I was leading into the next, form that he uses, which I think I made up, which was 10 syllables a line. I have to look in the back of the book because I can't remember. Once I've written a book, then, it's over. What does it say about him? I took the sonnet, I took the sonnets apart, used what I thought was working, discarded what wasn't, and added lines when 14 weren't sufficient for what he wanted to say. Now he speaks more or less in 10 syllable lines, which are sometimes sonnet-like and sometimes not.
Well,
Yeah.
I noticed that in his before, when he was Robin, not Raven, I got a sense of longing from him. Like he just wanted things, and then he had a strength to him when his poetry shifted. So it worked.
Right.
Well,
Right. That's thanks for saying that. That's what I was hoping would happen. It took me a long time to figure it out.
Paul asks, I know you love Dickens, David. Many find his novels to be similar to fairy tales. What do you think of that comparison?
Well, I like it. I haven't really thought about it. I'd have to think. I wish I could be more erudite at this moment, but I never heard that. But I love that idea. I guess one way that I think they're similar is, in fairy tales, kind of these magical things happen. And in Dickens novels, it isn't magic, but it falls under maybe the rubric of coincidence, so that it sort of feels like magic sometimes. And I don't really believe there is coincidence. I should not get into this because everybody's going to run away thinking I'm crazy. But I think there's more meaning than we know about. So in that way, I guess that's kind of a poor answer, Paul. But I'll think more about it and ask me again.
Gotcha. Marianne says, given your take on fairy tales and traditional tales, that these stories reveal the ways that we can become our best selves, Will you write more verse novels based on fairy tales and or traditional tales like maybe Gilgamesh? And then Matt, your friend Matt Eisenwine, wants to know, what was it about this particular story that said, I need to write this? Why did you pick this instead of Gilgamesh? What about the seventh raven grabbed you with its claws, so to speak?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you something funny about Gilgamesh. So I just read a review of The Seventh Raven written by somebody. I thank you so much. But she said, oh, never mind. Like she thought Gilgamesh was boring, but my book was not. So, you know, I'm going to be it's going to be impossible to live with, because now I'm better than Gilgamesh.
How many people can say that?
Yeah. Why the question about, first of all, I probably will not do another fairy tale, because I found it very hard to stick to the, you know, I really did not want to, you know, I know a book has to be entertaining somewhat, but I didn't just want it to be that. I didn't want to spin all this magic and what writers call world building and all of that. The book is sparse because of that. But it was real. So I wanted to be true to what I understood about the book, but that was very hard. So for example, I had to name the characters. And that already is kind of pulling away from what fairy tales do. So I do want to write more novels in verse. I have a list of ones that I want to do, but I probably will not do another fairy tale. Even though what I love about the fairy tales and the myths, I might do another myth, but you know, it's great because the story's kind of built in. You don't have to think of the plot stuff.
So what about the seventh raven sank its claws into you? I know you mentioned earlier in the event that one of your students did not recognize Rapunzel, and you wanted to make sure that the less well-known fairy tales didn't disappear.
Right. And again, you know, I thought about doing the Six Swans, which is another tale I like. But I like that, as I said earlier, I really like the Seven Ravens because of that excessive male energy in there, which is why all the boys are named Jack too. Because for one thing, even though they're about in my view, fairy tales are about our internal world. As I said when I was speaking, sort of half-assedly, but it's also true. We are living in a world made by male energy. And it's not working out that well for us. So I was interested in that. And to tell you the truth, what I really love about that tale is kind of the gruesome part, that she has to cut off her finger. And it isn't just because I'm a ghoul, but it's because, you know, that idea of the chicken bone, I don't think I said this when I was speaking, but by the way, here's Rovina's. Is that fabulous or what?
Blech. Ugh. That's so gross. Fairy tales are so gross. I mean, like the original ones, my 3-year-old loves it. She's like, yes, you know, she's bloodthirsty. But someone wants to know if you can read that part. We could probably fill a whole nother half hour about how fairy tales always require a sacrifice to get the thing that you want, and not something that you easily say yes to, but something that requires genuine sacrifice and loss.
Right.
Because it's not just like, this is going to be really hard. It's going to be, this is going to affect the entire rest of your life. And you mentioned, well, you didn't actually mention this in this talk, and this is not a spoiler, but she plays the harp.
Right. I added that harp because I really wanted to emphasize the fact that when she cuts off her finger, and she loves playing the harp, and when she cuts off her finger, it means she's no longer going to be able to play the harp. So it's a real sacrifice.
And we could go on and on about just the tradition of sacrifice to get to your goal in fairy tale, but instead I think we'll do one last question because we are about out of time right now.
Okay, but I just want to say one thing about that sacrifice thing.
Okay.
Can I say one thing that I forgot to say? One thing I love about that tale, which I just kind of realized recently, in all the years I've known it, because I've always thought about that chicken bone. Like, why does she give her a chicken bone? And I think maybe it's because, this is serious, guys. I think maybe it's because if we knew what is required of us on this road to becoming ourselves and to living authentically, we might not do it. And so sometimes we have to allow ourselves to be tricked. That chicken bone was never going to work. It isn't that she lost it. That was not going to work. But there had to be something to get her to that door so that she could make the real sacrifice. That's one of the reasons I love that story so much.
All right, so let's do one last question here from Rob. He says, so there are two heroes or narratives really in this book, Robin and April. Can you describe your thinking without spoilers about their intertwining urges and destinies?
Rob, I wish you had not asked that question because that it was so hard. Often when I teach writing at Lesley in the Lesley MFA program, and it's a low residency program, and often I say to my student, whose story is this? And I had to ask myself over and over again, whose story is this? And that's all I can say about it. It was difficult.
I have thoughts on this, and I don't know if I can talk about them on camera without spoilers. So we will have to talk about this later, David.
Okay.
But there are these two narratives, and I know I can't do it. I can't do it. There's spoilers. Okay, so I think that's about it for us. It is about 8 o'clock. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you to David. Thank you to, we had about 80 people show up for you tonight, David. That's really great. I'm going to be saving this chat sidebar for you because there's so many kind words. Thank you to everybody who joined us for David Elliott's launch tonight of The Seventh Raven. As I mentioned earlier, if you order a copy of The Seventh Raven from Gibson's Bookstore, David will be coming to sign and personalize them. And as asked in the chat, yes, we would be happy to slide a copy of Bull or Voices in front of David, and we'll just distract him so he doesn't realize he's signing a different book. It'll be fine. And Voices is newly out in paperback. So thank you so much, everybody who joined us this evening virtually. Thank you, David, for sharing your launch with us tonight.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for giving up some of your time tonight. I can't wait till I see all of you in person, and some of you that I don't know. I hope we meet sometime. And if we're ever in a situation, be sure to introduce yourself and let me thank you in person. Thanks so much, guys. You know, writing is kind of a lonely life. And I'm not saying poor me because I love my life, but it really means a lot that you all came out tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great night, everybody.